Amazing. Good evening. This is the April 12th, 2023 meeting of the Moscow Planning and Zoning Commission. Welcome, everybody. And first on the agenda is approval of the minutes from March 22nd. Do we have any additions, corrections, deletions? And do we have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
And second?
I'll second.
And Dennis second. So we're going to do roll call. Scott, we'll start with you.
Aye.
Joel?
I will pass since I was absent.
Okay. Dennis?
Aye.
Aye for me.
Aye.
Aye.
Victoria? And Rich?
I'll abstain. I was gone as well.
Okay, so did we have enough aye votes for passage? Okay. Next item on the agenda, public comment period, and seeing nobody in the audience, we will pass on that one. And Mike, you're up for the public hearing. This is a public hearing, legislative hearing, providing for the repeal of Title V, Chapter 1, providing for the amendment of Title 4, Chapter 1, Chapter 4, and the addition of Chapter 12 of the Moscow City Code regarding amendments to the subdivision code. Wow. So, Mike, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. Sorry to have to do a presentation again on this topic. I know many of you have seen this numerous times, but I promise this will be about the last time. It'll be the last public hearing on the topic of the subdivision code update, before, at least before the commission, hopefully advancing to council here soon. So just to provide a little bit of background, commission ended up finalizing the draft subdivision code July of 2019. We worked on it for a number of years leading up to that point. At that point, there was a subdivision review committee that was formed to review and provide recommendations that consisted of a developer of subdivisions, civil engineer, a land use attorney, and a couple planning and zoning commission members. Committee met two times, October 18th of 2019 and November 15th of 2019, and formed some recommendations. Pretty much went back and forth with this. At the meetings January and February of 2020, and then the commission ended up amending portions of the ordinance based upon the committee's recommendations. So really some good input and amendments that were made as part of that process. Then the commission conducted the public hearing on June 24th of 2020 and recommended approval as presented to City Council. And so at the same time, prior to advancing to council, there was a streets chapter that was being worked on or drafted by the engineering department. The intention of that was to replace the previous location of the subdivision code. So the subdivision code was being shifted from Title V, Chapter 1 to Chapter 12 of Title 4, being placed within the zoning code. And so the streets chapter was intended to replace the subdivision code within that Chapter 1. And so really, the drafting of that ended up getting waylaid a little bit. We had COVID during that time. And so that's been delayed by at least a few years. And so it was supposed to go simultaneously with City Council. And so that's why we're conducting the public hearing again for the subdivision code. Is because it never advanced because of the streets chapter. And so just to give you an idea, the streets chapter doesn't require a public hearing before the Planning and Zoning Commission, just City Council, because it's not part of the Local Land Use Planning Act. It's in another section of City Code. But there's general standards that are included within the streets chapter, go through street naming and addressing. So right now there's nowhere in our code that addresses naming and addressing. We have an internal policy, but that's about it. And so wanted to codify that to make that clear. Also access management and curb cuts. And so we eliminated that in a portion of the zoning code as part of the subdivision code as far as the approaches. And so engineering department really addresses and handles all of the essentially curb cuts. We call them approaches. And so those have been reinserted in the streets chapter because planning typically doesn't handle those. It's engineering department. And so making a shift there, it's essentially a similar section that we currently have in the zoning code. And then there's improvements with new construction of substantial improvements. And so as you recall, with the subdivision code, we have lot line adjustments, lot divisions that would create lots 4 or less. And so there's going to be a little bit of a gap. Right now, we essentially say a subdivision's anything, even if it's just a single lot in town, even if it's not within a subdivision, we still call it a subdivision. And a lot of that comes down to requiring the public improvements as part of new development. So if you have a principal structure, you build a new house and the road is deficient, doesn't have curb, gutter, sidewalk in front, we require, at least for your frontage, that you install that as part of the project. And so this is really the impetus of creating this streets chapter, is that if we were to pass the subdivision code, we'd still have a gap for those lots in town that, weren't part of a subdivision. Now that we're saying a subdivision is anything over 4 lots. And so this is just lays out the improvement requirements with new construction or substantial improvements within that. And then encroachments in a public right of way, another item that we don't currently have codified. It happens all the time. So, a lot of people install fences in the public right of way. Fort Russell and the older areas of town, you have 80-foot right of ways. Sometimes your property line's halfway into your front yard. We still allow fences to be placed up to the sidewalk or a foot away from the sidewalk. We just have to issue an encroachment permit saying that if city ever widens the street or the sidewalk gets widened, we can remove your fence and we don't have to replace it. And so those are pretty common, and we're just inserting kind of that provision within the streets chapter. So it brings us to the subdivision code. First aspect, first sections are lot line adjustments, lot divisions, and subdivision plats. As you recall, lot line adjustment essentially just between 2 or more lots. Do not create any additional lots. The process is proposed to be submitted to the zoning administrator, forward to review for some internal staff. After considering all comments received, zoning administrator shall approve lot line adjustment as requested, approve with conditions or revisions, or deny the proposed lot line adjustment. So I'll get that corrected. I don't think there's an error in the code, but I'll check on that. Zoning administrator then mails notice on the decision to the applicant and provides a summary of the decision, the process, and deadline for submission of an appeal. And then the appeal can go to city council within 15 days of being notified. So lot division process is fairly similar. So we're defining a lot division as creating no more than 4 additional lots for sale, use, or development, except when the division includes the extension of a public street right of way. And that was part of the committee's recommendation as part of that. We were originally proposing 2 additional lots. They wanted 4, and with that caveat that if it includes the public street right-of-way extension, that be kicked into a subdivision category. So similar to lot line adjustment, review internally, notice mailed within 600 feet of the property for lot divisions, allows 15 days to submit written comment. And then after all the comments are received, zoning administrator shall approve the division as requested, approve with conditions or revisions, or deny the proposed lot division. And then it's mailed to everybody within 600 feet that was notified previously with a summary of the decision and the appeal deadline submission process. And then the appeal, of course, goes to the city council within 15 days of being notified. And zoning administrator's decision shall not be final until expiration of the appeal period and the submission of the record of survey for the division. So it brings us to the subdivision section. So this is really kind of the process that we have now. Not a whole lot's changing. So subdivision obviously is 4 or more additional lots for sale, use, or development, or any division that includes the extension of the public street right of way. Go through various sections. So parkland dedication, public improvements. There's preliminary plat process, which is similar to what we currently have. RCS is required. Phasing is allowed. Preliminary plat approval and kind of the expiration dates and how long that's valid for. And then we get into final plat, submittal, review, and approval, and duration of that approval. And then the development and monumentation agreement. So this is really the structure we currently have within the subdivision code. So not a lot has changed within these sections. Replatting, just stating that if you're to replat a property, it essentially just goes back through the subdivision plat process from the very beginning. Subdivision design standards go through a purpose, applicability, subdivision or development name, so you can't have subdivisions that are similar to other subdivisions within the city or area city impact, street standards and access. And I go through our typical street standards. So construction of the street and then installation of traffic control devices, stop signs, street signs, lights within the subdivision fall under that. Number of access points. And this is based upon really fire code requirements. And so typically 30 dwelling units or less, there's one access point, 30 to 100, two access points, more than 100, no less than three access points. So directly out of the fire code, we also incorporated some flexibility there as far as the city engineer being able to make a determination that there may be less or more of those access points required depending upon certain circumstances. Next is the street layout and connectivity. So we've got general street alignments, offset intersections, gated streets prohibited, street connectivity. This is the street connectivity section. So this is a new addition, really just trying to provide for connectivity within subdivisions. So some circumstances, obviously, with the rolling hills of the Palouse, it's challenging to get a perfect gridded street network. You end up with cul-de-sacs sometimes. And that's just the topography that you're dealt in the subdivision. And so there's no getting around that in certain developments, but certainly trying to find as much connectivity, really concerned with emergency services, refuse collection. The more interconnected we are, the more efficient we are as a city. So providing that. We've got a maximum block length. So this has not changed from what we previously had, 660 feet. Is that limitation. Have a cul-de-sac allowance, 660 feet again, providing some type of pedestrian connection at the end of that if you do use a cul-de-sac. And then going through pedestrian walkways, so just a general statement, and then pedestrian walkway standards. So looking at that, so typically we're looking at access to certain neighborhood amenities, whether it be commercial amenities, parks, schools, shopping, employment centers, trying to provide pedestrian routes. And so we have a little threshold there at the end. So generally be required where pedestrian walkways reduce the average travel distance of pedestrians by more than 50%, or where otherwise required by the council to mitigate potential safety hazards. And then some standards there. Typical width is 10 feet for pedestrian walkways for the right-of-way dedication. Those walkways shall be constructed by the developer in accordance with the city standards. So if it's anticipated to have high bicycle use, should provide access to the bike routes or separate pathway facilities. Minimum constructed width shall be 8 feet. Typical width would be 5 feet, which is just a standard sidewalk, and that'd be within the 10-foot right-of-way if it's just a
Not
standard.
sure I understood the last sentence there.
Yeah.
The 8 foot,
That'd be if there's bicycle.
rather than
yeah,
10 feet.
Yeah. Well, it'd be the public right-of-way of a minimum width of 10. We don't, it just says pedestrian walkway. Typically, if it's a sidewalk, it's a pedestrian walkway. We just have, it's 5 feet for the standard.
Right.
It just increases to 8 if there's anticipated to be high level of bicycle activity.
That'll be an easier way to say that.
Then going through lots, so typical lot arrangement, lot lines, through lots, corner lots, flagpole lots. So looking at these, so just trying to provide logical and orderly, considerate of floodplains or wetlands that may be present in a subdivision. Then we talk about, alternative development options such as the clustered plan unit development should be utilized. Such natural features are present. Lot lines should be at right angles or radial to the street lines, unless a variation from the rule will give a better layout. Through lots should be avoided through the use of a rear alley or private drive access, alternative street layout or other means. And then corner lot, just to accommodate is being constructed on the site and fitting in with the greater setbacks. So typically on corner lots, you have front setbacks. You also have street side setbacks. So staff dedicates considerable amount of time trying to help, homeowners, contractors fit these floor plans on these corner lots. And so that 10% increase would really help on that. Then flag lots, just stating flag lots are allowed and just pointing to the section within city code that addresses flag lots. Parkland dedication. So we go through dedication of parkland, amount of land to be dedicated. I think the previous conversation largely hinged around the commercial zoning districts within the parkland dedication. Originally, we planned on taking those out because what drives parkland is population increase. And so housing, residential zoning districts would drive parkland dedication requirements. But in all or almost all of our commercial zoning districts, we allow residential uses. And so Commission wanted to insert the paragraph at the end, I think, which was similar to maybe 2 zoning codes ago. We had a similar statement, or 2 subdivision codes ago. I think we had a similar statement, essentially saying that if it's a strictly commercial subdivision, the developer would enter into a development agreement stating that at any point in the future that any of the uses or those lands within the subdivision gets used for residential purposes, that they either pay a fee in lieu of or dedicate additional space for parkland, is essentially what that says. And stormwater management and conveyance. So this is just similar to what we currently have, our stormwater standards, which requires detention, preservation of natural drainage courses where feasible and possible, and then detention facilities. So have to be detained at the pre-development rate. And we have a section just goes through standard utilities, lift and booster stations, utility easements. Of course, we have a section on flood hazard areas. So we're required by FEMA to insert this within the subdivision code. There's just general flood hazard areas, base flood elevation data. And then required improvements. So kind of lays out design and installation of those improvements, where they're required, and being able to enter into a development agreement and allow phasing of those improvements. There's a security that needs to be posted. Payment in lieu of public improvements of construction, certainly an option. And then warranty period for public improvements is laid out there as well. And then just monumentation. And so these are the corner monumentations of every lot within the subdivision, as well as middle of the road monumentation. So just lays out kind of the process of those requirements. And then there's a security. Bulk and placement regulation table is going to be slightly amended. So this was just language that was taken narratively out of the zoning code and being inserted. So this is just minimum frontage on a public street other than an alley. Just inserting that for ease of use within the bulk and placements regulation table, but really nothing's changing there as far as the frontage on a street right away. And then we get into the 2 subdivision options that the commission worked on. We have the traditional subdivision option. So this is more of the gridded street network with alleys, pedestrian oriented, mixture of housing types, neighborhood open space, a little bit smaller lot sizes. And so this just allows, without going through a plan unit development, the option for a developer to go through this subdivision option in order to be able to achieve the outcome of greater open space and smaller lots within the subdivision. We go through kind of minimum common open space that's required. So Parks and Rec obviously would make a recommendation to City Council on that. And we have some standards for the open space. Streets need to be in a traditional gridded pattern with an alley. Cul-de-sac or other dead-end configuration shall only be allowed in limited situations where the street cannot connect or be extended due to extreme topography, existing development, or natural man-made physical barrier that precludes such extension. And the lot should be designed for vehicular access to the rear via an alley. This allows for the dwellings to be located closer to the street to reinforce the traditional neighborhood design and a maintained pedestrian-oriented environment. And then the alley shall serve all building lots unless special circumstances arise. And then the bulk and dimensional standards table for traditional subdivision. So minimum development size is 5 acres. You can see the lot sizes have been reduced by about 30 to 40% from what they typically are, as well as the widths. Setbacks have been reduced. The minimum open space is greater than what normally you would typically see within a subdivision. And then there's an effective net density and a maximum building height, which is about the same as what we currently have for those zones. And the last option is the conservation subdivision. And so this is more preserving sensitive areas such as floodplains, steep slopes, wetlands, critical habitat, natural areas, as well as just general open space. And so it was originally limited to those aforementioned items, but the commission wanted to add just general open space in case, we just wanted a conservation subdivision that had greater amounts of open space and just smaller lots. And so that's really the purpose of this option. So common open space is typically the same as traditional that we just went through. And then the bulk and dimensional standards table. So we added suburban residential SR zone as one of the applicable zones for the conservation subdivision, but similar to the traditional option. So is by about 30 to 40%, as well as the widths, reducing setbacks and increasing common open space greater than what you typically see with the traditional subdivision. So with that, after conducting the public hearing and considering testimony received, recommend approval of the proposed ordinance to City Council would be staff's recommendation before you tonight. Certainly be able to answer any questions. And I would note that we did have public comment. Nancy Cheney had submitted public comment early last week, and I ended up responding to some of that with another Word document at the end of your packet. We changed some things that made sense within the document. There's an explanation on some of the other comments.
So any questions for Mike? Joel, do you want to revisit the language on the pedestrian walkway? That was the
what page is that?
12-5-4. Sorry, I'm going to have to look for it myself.
Page 33.
On 33 of 42.
33. Right there. Okay. 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 For pedestrian walkway is anticipated to have high bicycle use, such as walkways that provide access to bike routes or separated pathway facilities. The minimum constructed width shall be 8 feet. And that's simply saying that when the sidewalk includes a well-used bicycle path, it has to be the width of the sidewalk has to be 8 feet.
Yeah, I think it's just a little confusing because at the very beginning it just says right away has to be 10 feet.
Yeah, I was confusing the 10 feet with the 8 feet.
So we can say that right away width is 10 feet and the constructed width is 5 feet. I think that maybe makes it a little clearer just because.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's the typical sidewalk width is 5 feet.
Yeah.
But in the circumstances where there's high bicycle use that connects to other bicycle paths, then it is increased to 8 feet. So I think that's where the confusion kind of lies.
That helps.
Yeah.
But regardless, the setback is 10 feet.
Yeah, their total
The
right of
right-of-way
way
is
is
10
10 feet. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the intention of that is that our Parks Department plows all these, or they do at certain times, and you need a place to put the snow off to the side.
That's
still on.
Like the sidewalk just out beyond me
Yeah.
on what is it, Lanning Lane?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Mike, could we make a clarifying change with that and still approve tonight without,
Yeah,
I don't want to hold up us going through the approval process because we make a minor
No,
language change.
you could just recommend approval with a modification.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I do have one more minor detail. I would admit that I did not study it in detail, but one thing that did catch my eye, since I like to believe that the figures and so on should be self-interpretable, the description of connectivity. I spent quite a bit of time on the bottom of the two examples in there, trying to count up 6 nodes. And I only counted 3. And then it's explained below in the text that it's nodes plus ends, ends of streets.
Yeah.
And I would propose that it would be clearer if nodes, including ends, were in the graphic image.
Or just have 6 nodes per n, including ends.
Yes. Yeah.
Would that be easy enough to make that, Mike?
Yeah.
So where it says 6 street links, then you'd have 6 nodes per n, includes
nodes
and
including
not
ends.
including, but includes ends. Does that make sense?
So just parentheses and including,
What do you think, Joel? Is that?
Including ends.
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, I can clarify that.
includes, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's, Joel, anything
Yeah,
else?
otherwise I'm
Okay,
ready to go with this.
Scott, anything? And Dennis? Nels? Anything for, any
I
questions?
like the changes that were made in response to Nancy's comments.
I agree. I appreciate her thoroughness and the comments she made. And I also appreciate, Mike, that you included the responses and the changes that you made where it was appropriate. So
Yeah.
thank you for doing that.
Some of the same comments that she was making caught my eye, and the explanations helped.
Great. Victoria, anything? Okay, and Rich? Okay, well, Mike, thank you. With that, we will open the public hearing, and seeing nobody to provide testimony, we will close the public hearing, which seems a little bit of a strange way to do this, but I'm not quite sure if there's any other protocol. So with that, do we have any further comments from commissioners? So if that's the case, then I would entertain a motion to approve sending the ordinance, the draft, to city council with the changes just recommended. So do we have a motion?
So moved.
Okay, Dennis moved. Did we have a second?
I will
And
second it.
Joel second. So we'll do a roll call. Start with you, Rich.
Aye.
Victoria?
Aye.
Nels?
Aye.
Aye for me, Dennis. And
Aye.
Joel?
Aye.
Scott. So passed. Thank you very much, Mike. That was a great effort. Thank you for wading us through the changes and re-explaining it to us. So I think a lot of us had it had kind of dropped off our radar for some time. So anyway, thank you. That is great. So the next item on the agenda, the citizen survey question. We talked about this briefly last time. I'm still in a bit of a quandary about this, but have any of you also had thoughts about what we're going to probably do 2 questions, right, Mike?
I
Most
think
likely.
that originally they asked for 5, but they provided more clarity that if you do ask for 5, it's likely to be whittled down to about 2 or 3. So I think we
Okay.
should shoot for probably 3 questions. But we have until the beginning of August for this. And so really no rush, but just wanted to get it on everybody's mind so we could start kind of formulating some questions. And usually it seems like we're in a rush to come up with questions within a month of
Yeah.
when they're due. So now that we have some additional time here, it's nice to be able to think about it pretty thoroughly.
You know, one of the things that occurs to me is that if we are able to, before this is due, have this meeting with city council, some of that discussion may generate some questions and issues that we share with city council, or that they council would like us to put out. So I mean, I'm in, like I said, I'm in a quandary here. I'm not sure I know at this stage quite what to ask.
Well, I think it's planned that we have that meeting within the next couple months.
Okay.
So,
So we've got some
maybe
time.
we have some time. Yeah.
And I would, it would be appropriate, I think, to even whatever agenda that we put together with the council meeting is to ask that question and maybe come up with some thoughts. In the meantime, I'm certainly open to any ideas that anybody has. I'm kind of,
It seems like I'm like you. I don't quite know where to go to, but it seems like we ought to focus on the parts of our lives that cause the most consternation amongst citizens. And obviously, when we have a new subdivision, people come racing out, and they're not interested in the current subdivisions or how wide the streets are. They just are sort of anti-growth sensibility seems to be here with us. It seems to be endemic all across the land. You get developers and architects and engineers want to build stuff, and people act like they don't want to build stuff, which seems just a little strange. So I don't know if I could guide us in. I mean, we had both of the big subdivisions, both on both sides of the city, attracted a lot of attention. So probably when we go home at night, we ought to try and focus in that area. What are those issues that people seem to be anxious about, and construct 3 or 4 questions that relate to those issues? Obvious,
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I was just looking back through the results, and we just barely got the 2019 results because I think those were lost in administration with COVID, and I don't think they were presented to city council. But just going through this question about, so of course it says, please identify the importance of the following climate change strategies for P&Z to consider in planning efforts and recommendations. But you look at these two right here: encourage development that is at a density sufficient to support multiple modes of transportation. Look at the highly important, that's 70-80%. Same with the question below.
is what you're saying is it's surprising that we get this reaction.
Yeah, it's
Are
just
those
the
people
opposite. I think that
represent some place down there at the not important group. It is a little unique. That's a good point.
Well, I remember Deb Reynolds, when she was on the commission, made a statement about you don't really know what you believe in until it happens right next to you. And I
Right.
think that's, you can say you like density and everything and multiple modes of transportation, and then all of a sudden a big development comes in right next to you that brings those things. And yeah, certainly you think about, you may switch your point of view at that point in time.
So
I like the direction that your idea about somehow focusing on the development issue. I think that's kind of the theme, and we work to develop the questions around that. And it occurs to me that the difficulty of the task is knowing how to ask the question. You can ask questions in ways that guarantee you'll never understand the answer, or nobody will understand the question. So maybe our task is saying, okay, I like this idea that Nels is bringing out, that we head down this direction, but the importance of the task is how do we ask what question do we ask and how do we ask it? So maybe if everybody's amenable to it, we'll sort of start down this direction and the thinking will go toward how we're going to ask the question and construct.
Yeah, one of the difficulties of asking the question is, I think that it's, I really don't think it's anti-growth. I think a lot of people are, in fact, worried about water.
Yeah.
And that weaves into it. And at the moment, I'm not sure we quite know how to address that
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
That's a good point,
Yeah.
Joel. Yeah, I think many of the people that were, we do get concerned, and we've even had commission members who were more water conscious than some of us are. And so that's probably really related to it. Yeah, I think that water issue is one that wants to go. What does it mean to have development here? It just struck me. I'm one of those people who watch public television a lot. And one of my favorite programs is Outside Idaho. And, as you fall in love with your state and what that's all about. But one of the things that you hear fairly regularly as they're doing Outside Idaho is the folks that live, whether they live in Bonners Ferry or Chalice or wherever, they're likely to say, we like this. I like where I live and I don't want it to change.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of surprising in a way. And I just find it, I just heard it just a few days ago. I think these were people from Chalice of all places, of course. And I doubt that Chalice is growing much. It isn't like Boise. I mean, if you say you don't like change in Boise, you'd be laughed out of town after all, because it's all about change. Moscow's a little different because we've grown rather slowly over the years. And we do have this water issue that our forebears, our pioneers, didn't know what was going to befall us. Yeah.
So I have several comments.
Yes, ma'am.
So one thing to keep in mind is the survey goes out to a range of people. The people who come to public hearings are usually the NIMBYs. It's in my backyard. So they don't necessarily represent the range that you capture in the survey. We need to be sensitive to their questions, but it isn't the end all be all, because it is a more restricted view because it is a neighborhood, not the town.
That's a good point.
Another point is that these questions, they're so hard to put out there. And you're putting questions out when we don't have all the answers, but the public certainly does not understand the landscape that we deal with. They don't understand that the state has all kinds of restrictions and we can't do X, Y, and Z. And so it's very hard to put, they need the education, because otherwise they're giving you suggestions that we just can't do. It's illegal. So that's another problem. If you phrase the questions in such a way to be so careful how you phrase it, now nobody knows what the heck you're asking, and I see that all the time happening. And also, as you phrase a question, if you say something like, well, do you want us to try and conserve water? You are suggesting you have the power to do that by asking the question. And then you set yourself up to, well, you asked us the question and why aren't you doing it? And so then you have another problem that comes out with this. Those are just, and you got 3 questions, maybe 2. You only get a little bit of space. I mean, I don't know. I can identify things that are of interest: parking, water, growth, or anti-growth. On the one hand, you want growth, and on the other hand, they don't want anything to change. and they contradict themselves because they don't understand how that works. But I have no idea how you're going to phrase questions.
Yeah.
They're going to help capture that in some useful way because it's just passive. I don't, you know.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I'm glad we've got some time to keep thinking about this because hence my quandary.
Right, because,
No.
you know, I mean,
You know,
I
and
haven't mentioned parking, and of course, parking.
I look at the response and I think, okay, how does that guide our processes? It really doesn't very much. I mean, it's good information to know, but so like I said, I'm glad we've got some time to think this through because can we opt out? Yes, Gina.
A question that isn't leading everyone into believing we're going to replace all of the downtown trees with palm trees. That sort of thing. They're weighty all of a sudden. It feels like now more than ever, we've ended up with this commission survey being kind of daunting. So it's okay. And I think it's awesome that city staff is doing the job they're doing and letting you guys kind of get used to the idea before you got to make the decisions. But I'm with you, and it is a question of what you do have control over and not giving the wrong impression. And then we get the same deal. You know, we're like, some of these things we don't have control over. So I hear you. I'm sorry, but everybody is in it. Misery and company in that moment, right? So.
Thank you. I mean, that exactly. And maybe I know surveys are important, but maybe the whole concept of how and why we do surveys should be a part of the discussion. So, I mean, what are we trying to learn here? I mean, we want to understand what the citizens of the city think about the things that we're doing, but you know, what do we do with that information?
We know they care about parking. We know they care about water. We know they don't want so much density that it's really crunching their neighborhood. But we all know that. We all think that. That doesn't tell us what we need to do. That doesn't tell us what we can even try to do. You know. So you know, to send out the same questions in some form and get the same answers back that hit the same brick walls, that hit the same, well, nobody knows the answer to it anyway. I mean, what are you accomplishing other than giving someone a voice that doesn't seem to go anywhere? That's our hands.
So remind me again when this is due?
Beginning of August.
Beginning of August. Okay. Well, good. We can kick the can down the road easier. So
Never seen a survey that I didn't wind up just writing in the margins all kinds of things because what does this question mean? Does it mean this or does it mean that? Or why don't you ask that? You know, I mean,
yeah,
drive me
I
crazy.
agree. Well,
No wonder we're just
Obvious.
doing the 2000.
continued discussion here.
Somebody have to read all those comments? Yeah.
So anything else that anybody would care to contribute on the survey, Joel?
No. Well, I guess it's related. Totally. Since we're talking about growth, I'm curious what the city's record is in terms of building permits.
Oh,
Mike? What if the mortgage rate has ballooned in the last couple months? What's been the impact?
Well, yeah, we've certainly seen seems like some things have been slowing down. I mean, we can look at like last year's permits for single family dwellings, and those were about on average, I think we permitted 40 single family dwellings last year. 40
Okay.
single family dwellings. I think the previous year we had 44, 45. So typically we've been averaging 30 to 40 over the last probably 5-6 years. It's slowly been on the increase. We thought we were going to continually build upon that, but yeah, this last year I think it was just 40. All our multifamily always just fluctuates depending upon what kind of larger projects. So that goes up and down. There's really not a trend to that other than just kind of the up and down, but really just had a relatively average year. But yeah, certainly commercial's been fairly strong. And yeah, it seems like a lot of projects are starting to get underway, but hopefully once we start to ramp up, I mean, we had the kind of longer winter that ended up drying out here. So a lot of people end up holding off, waiting for the weather to get better and the ground to dry out. So hopefully we have a great year, but not.
So it's a continuation of slow growth,
Yeah.
like it's always been.
Yeah, we, back in the economic development days, I mean, we always talked about the slow growth, and I mean, it has a good side as well as a difficult side, but yeah, it's,
Okay, one
yes, ma'am.
just came to me again. The 2014 survey, I don't like the Likert scale. I think it's like a multiple choice question. A, B, C, you know, it's not that thought, critically thinking, not that much critical thinking. I like the one from 2014 better, that where you had the comparison, like a neighborhood includes a mix of housing types, stores, businesses that are easy to walk to, or do you want a neighborhood that's primarily, you know, here's a choice, here's a scenario, here's a scenario. Do you want free parking? Do you want to be able to park in front of your house? Whatever the question is, but here's a real life example, or, you know, you got to pick one. You may not like either one of them. I want to know which one you're going to pick. You know, that tells me better how you feel about something than just picking these somewhat like and don't like at all. I mean, I don't like the Likert scale. Sorry, I don't like it. I like this style better.
It's a good point.
Okay, well, I'm glad we have some time to think on this a little bit, but and could please continue to think on it. We'll as we have the opportunity, we'll bring it back so that it just stays in front of us. So that's great. Okay, anything else on that particular one? Okay, so the next one is the shared reading. I have an ulterior motive in this, and I'm sorry I passed this out to you because I don't normally like shared reading kind of things. But the idea of how you do a 15-minute city, it's great in Paris and Seattle and maybe even Portland and London. I think of my time in Seattle with Belltown, which is a really neat neighborhood that probably has more population in a few blocks than Moscow does. But how do you implement a 15-minute city in a city our size with the resources that we have? And I can't figure it out. So the reason I threw this out there is just to kind of try to generate some discussion and ideas. I'm not advocating a 15-minute city exactly. I just want to know what's possible for that kind of,
Half at least agreeing with you. There's no doubt that this concept comes from people in big cities. No doubt. And it's possible in big cities, as you say. I was shocked to move to New York without a car and find out that I wonder if there's a lumber yard. And sure enough, all you have to do is just look around and ask somebody. And there is a lumber yard within 6 blocks of your apartment. It's just the oddest thing in the world. I had no idea until. So yeah, the big city. And we also noticed that most of the people who are talking about this are from other countries than America. There was almost no.
Yep.
So Americans are not very thoughtful, by and large. That being said, then it seems to me, I would disagree with you a little bit. It seems to me that Moscow isn't too far. In other words, you can do this a 15-minute thing in a big city, and you can do it in a little town. but the in between, all the towns that are basically, say, 30 or 40,000 to a million, all those towns are almost sucking air.
Yeah.
Because the little town, and we're still okay. I mean, really, even if you live over in on the other side of Mountain View, you can really get to downtown if you want to ride your bike. You can get to downtown pretty easy.
Yeah.
And yet, the reason you can have this in the big cities is because they've decided to have mass transit, and you can't have mass transit in a average city because you can't afford it.
Yep.
In other words, you've got to have in my teaching over 25 years, one of the really big things I learned about transit and trains is that no train system in the world, no passenger train system in the whole world pays for itself. It was shocking to me. I thought, duh, it must. I mean, and they said, the people who did the research on it, apparently Switzerland comes closer to paying. They come within some few $1 million of paying for their transit system because they charge you for every, if you just look sideways, they charge you another 30 drachmas for looking sideways. They're really good at collecting money, but it's hard. So you'd think that the metro system in New York pays for itself. It does not. It has to be supported. And of course, those of you who listen to the news or read the newspapers know that there's a lot of anti-government people. They don't want the government to be doing anything, let alone paying for a transit system. So we're,
Well, and that's,
you know,
yeah.
so we're in, but I do think we're close to it in Moscow. And if we could just get a couple of other little neighborhoods, in other words, if out on Mountain View, we could concoct a few coffee shops and a restaurant or something, people could really live a good life.
Well, and
You know, but every time we try to invent a business area in a residential area, people get all unhinged about
I
it.
remember some of those discussions. You're
In other
absolutely
words,
right.
As Rick is building a subdivision out past Palouse River Drive, it would be really cool if there would be, and I think they're thinking about it. I see signs of, you know, some more compactness, some apartments, and apartments mean a chance to leave your car someplace and just go have a cup of coffee without having to go to One World. I don't want to get rid of One World at all, but you know, we need to begin to think about a couple outlying little those developments. And I know when we tried one over on Third or here just in the last few years, people didn't seem to like it. They immediately think that you're introducing some kind of Smutville or something into their life rather than a cool coffee shop. Somehow we need, I don't know how to beat that.
So one of the things that you mentioned, and I think this was really key when I was looking at this too, was the transit piece of this. Because if you don't have a really viable transit system, then you're dependent on walking or bicycling. And there's no way that a community, I used to do a lot of work with what then was called the Urban Mass Transit Administration. And the federal government loves to give money to buy buses, but fare box revenue, they don't provide. And you're right, there's no transportation system anywhere that pays for itself. So you've got to have the resources in the community to make that work. And we've got an okay transit system, but it's not one that's going to make it a 15-minute city in the sense of the definition here. So anyway, I just wanted
It's
to,
not going to make it that accessible. because it's got limited routes and limited schedule.
Right. Yeah.
So, and when you're talking about 15-minute city examples that tend to get thrown out are jump on your bike and get to point A to point B and have a cup of coffee or get to your office. Well, that's not what necessarily people are doing.
Yeah.
If they're shopping, they've got shopping. They got to get home again too, or on that bus or something. And if they're older or have kids or are in strollers or wheelchairs or something, then it's a different scenario. And part of what this is saying is to not make it an exclusive use.
Yeah.
And so you have to think of who's using it. One thing it does do is suggest that we should have more pedestrian friendly opportunities so that more people, whether they're walking it, maybe it takes them 30 minutes to get somewhere, but whether they're walking it or whether they're jumping on their bike,
And I think we're pretty good at, I think
I think we
we
are
do
too.
that. So,
It seems to me, if you, in our own case, we have a mall over there, but the East Side Mall it may not be gorgeous, but it's really useful. And there's a bank and grocery and a coffee shop and boom, 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 and you can take your kids there. So really, for the people living close to Mountain View, no, they may not be. It may be a little much to ask them to get out to the mall over there, but
they've got access
they've
here.
got access here. And so I think that as we look at I think one of the frustrating things is that we depend on developers to be brilliant, to come up with these ideas because they're the can-do people. And us bureaucrats are really not. We just look at the rules and talk about it. But it's, so, those folks who don't like developers are missing the crux of the deal, because it's developers that have built our country, really.
Yep.
When you get right down to it. So there is a question for us. Do you ever take a developer to lunch?
Well, anyway, I just kind of wanted to throw it out because there's been all this talk about even some of the stuff that we've had before, these walkable cities, 15-minute cities. So,
and they are so dependent on mass transit.
Yep. Okay, well, I just had to get that out of my
That's
system.
my
so.
question that I write when you do the thing is, well, when are we going to talk about the car?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I wish I'm a pretty liberal guy, but I'm also admittedly, I don't walk nearly as much. In other words, I drive my car constantly.
Yep.
So I try not to throw any stones at people because like the lady in Texas, we used to go on planning trips, and we were talking to somebody in Dallas, and she was saying, we get in our Excalibur if we want to go around the block. Thank you.
Yep.
Well,
That's what they mean.
in the last sentence here was the germ of the whole article. It's not about preventing movement. It's about giving everybody a choice to move.
Yeah.
And that's the focus.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. That was an important piece of it. I agree. Okay. Unless anybody has any further comments, Joel, you're up next for a transportation.
The Transportation Commission is actually meeting tomorrow,
Wow.
4:00 in this room, and the program looks interesting, related to what we're talking about. We're talking about the sidewalk program, which I believe has been more or less inactive, sort of through some of the recent times. Well, I'll find out more tomorrow. We're also going to be talking about the streets ordinance, which I think is what we just passed over here. So I'll get that also tomorrow. And we'll get update from Idaho Department of Transportation.
Super. Okay, that's great. Well, nice that, yeah, I think this is the first one that we've,
Yeah.
Coordinated with.
They've been a bit erratic here recently.
so, the next meeting, April 26th, any previews on that, Mike?
I don't think we have anything slated for the agenda, so if nothing comes up, maybe we'll look at canceling that.
Yeah, the one that was canceled for today, that doesn't appear to be coming back anytime soon, or?
Yeah, I think they're going to be reworking. I think
Okay.
that plan is what the idea is for
Okay.
them.
So, yeah, we're sure open. If there's nothing on the agenda, I don't see any reason that we would. So let Dennis and I know, and we can make a decision. So anything else for the good of the order?
My only, just a comment, it's not a big deal, but I'm probably gonna miss May meetings. So Jennifer, you'll probably want to ask for a quorum. I'm going to have some interesting surgery in the month of May, and that may,
Actually,
I'm liable to be capacitated, but I should be back in June.
I am actually going to miss that meeting in 2 weeks.
Yeah, oh, the 26th. Okay, so one more reason.
I'm here for that, but I leave on the early first week in May.
Okay.
And
And if I remember, Sue is also gone for the next meeting too, isn't she?
She is.
So that's two. Okay. Well, if there's an opportunity to cancel, we'll take it.
Okay.
All right. So meeting adjourned. Thanks, everybody.